podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everybody, no one was expecting this, but I was talking to Rob Pollard, the Manchester City correspondent for Bleacher Report and Manchester Evening News journalist on Twitter, and he said, "Oi, get me on the podcast." So I thought, hey, let's do a bonus episode. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rob. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you.
We should have got you on the proper podcast, but a lapse in planning is what led to it happening now instead. Are you excited about the derby?
I am incredibly excited about the derby. I mean, I wrote a piece this week that just sort of said how different this one feels and how different it could be on the pitch compared to certainly last season's, but for me, the last three seasons. I mean, if you go back to, Mancini threatening to tear down banners that were mocking City for 35 years of no trophies, and Fergie calling City noisy neighbours and banners going up on Deansgate and all that kind of thing. The last 3 years has been slightly damp, shall we say. I think it's been a reflection of the managers. I think Pellegrini was never one to kind of use the media to his advantage or try and fan the flames. I think Van Gaal's language towards the end of his time was increasingly defensive, and he was becoming increasingly suspicious of the media. And so you had a situation where the build-up to the derbies last season were really kind of just sort of lacked intensity, really. And then I think the games reflected that. I mean, the second one had some kind of narrative in the sense that, Rashford made a bit of a dummy of an experienced defender and became the youngest scorer in a derby, which was a great story. But other than that, I think if you look at the two games, they were lacking a lot of what we would have come to expect from the fixtures. So I don't think there's any danger of that this time, given that A, the two teams look a hell of a lot better than they did last season, and B, you've got managers who don't necessarily like each other, but also know how to operate and use the media to their advantage.
I think it's sort of interesting, isn't it, that you've got this, the rivalry obviously exists and is fierce and passionate between the two clubs, even if the kind of on-pitch stuff has been a real damp squib in the last few seasons, Rashford aside. But it's a sort of very strange cultural phenomenon that we've kind of superimposed another rivalry over the top of the existing rivalry. In terms of Pep and Mourinho, it seems from the Mourinho angle, he doesn't seem to have been talking this one up that much yet. I mean, I guess the press conferences will kick off all the coverage of that stuff. What have you made of Pep's take on the derby so far?
Well, he's done the same. He's sort of tried to play it down. He was asked, I think, at his very first press conference about Mourinho, and he basically just said, look, if I see him out in Manchester, I'll buy him dinner. Kind of thing, to sort of play it down. But I think the reason it's been a little bit muted so far is because the international break has come right before it. So the build-up, you've not had the two-game build-up kind of thing. If they'd been around the Premier League fixtures this weekend, you would have had Sky and all the nationals and all the papers and everybody else trying to fan the flames ahead of 1 week ahead of the derby, whereas they've not had that opportunity. But I think you'll see once this international period sort of winds back down and the TV and newspapers start to ramp up their coverage, which has happened actually. I mean, I read a fantastic Ian Ladyman piece today, which people might want to read, sort of charting the fallout between the two managers and sort of some of the things that have happened before. I think you're going to see that it'll get ramped up, and then obviously Friday when they both speak is going to be very, very interesting indeed. I think that's when it'll really, really kick off.
Being a football writer at Manchester's local newspaper, it feels like there can't have been much of a better time to be doing that than right now, in terms of Manchester is the centre of the football universe at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you look at in my job, I sort of look at football in two ways. One as a fan of football and somebody who enjoys it, and then obviously from a professional perspective. And I think as a fan, I am hugely excited, as you and probably everybody else is. From a professional perspective, you just feel really fortunate. On our desk, I think we all recognise we're in a very fortunate position that this huge story has kind of fallen on our lap, and we're very much at the heart of it in terms of the fact that we sort of get really good access at the two clubs, and we've got a history of covering both clubs. So yeah, I think there can't have been a more exciting time on the desk. I mean, I've only been on the sports desk at the Evening News for sort of 8 or 9 months. But I'm presuming this summer I've been there 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm presuming they would say the same, that this is the most exciting it's been. And I also think as well, since the takeover at City, which is when the derby became relevant to both clubs again. I think previously it had meant far more to the City fans for very obvious reasons than it ever did to the United fans. Certainly throughout my childhood that was the case. But since the takeover in 2008, this actually feels like the first time that both teams have started the season with very, very similar quality squads. I think every other season there's been one or the other has sort of, felt ahead of the other. Now that's not always been reflected in the final league position. I think Ferguson's final title win, for example, at the start of that season, I personally would have said City had a stronger squad. But there's always been one at the beginning of the season that I would have looked at and thought, you know what, they definitely have a stronger squad than this one. Whereas the beginning of this season, obviously they're not identical. No two squads are absolutely on a par. But it does feel like they're really... I think United have had the best window of any club. I know Woodward gets a lot of stick, and it's understandable, a lot of it, but he had a wish list this summer of things to tick off, and he's done it emphatically. When you look at it, they needed a manager who was a winner, and he's gone and got that. I think that was a reaction to City getting Guardiola as well. I think they knew they had to get somebody who could deal with him. I think United have been crying out for some arrogance on the pitch. I think they've needed that because they've been sort of playing within themselves a little bit, and I think Ibrahimovic is the obvious signing to tick that box. I think Eric Bailly brings a bit of power and pace to a defence that looked a little bit unstable to me at times. The defence isn't perfect, by the way, but obviously with one window there's only sort of so much change you can enact. And then Mkhitaryan brings a bit of guile and a bit more quality in the final third. So I think United have had a really good summer, and because of that are sort of right back in the mix again. And I think that adds something to this fixture. I think the two managers is obviously a great story, but also the fact that two teams are coming together who are very, very closely matched and are probably going to contest the title. My only complaint about this fixture is it probably comes a little bit too early in the season, in the sense that both managers would have liked a little bit more time to shape the squads in their own image, but we are where we are, and it's still incredibly exciting. It's going to be a great day, I think. How's the Pep Guardiola project going so far? From your perspective, how much do you think, how much impact has he already made in terms of the way they're playing, and how, because from my perspective, it looks like, especially having seen Van Gaal try and impose the kind of the somewhat prehistoric precursor to Pep Guardiola football on, and it took so long for him to get his message across. But Pep seems to have come in, and they all seem to be zipping the ball around to each other and knowing where to stand pretty quickly. Yeah, I can't believe how quickly it has happened. The first game I saw live, I'd watched a couple of the friendlies on the TV, but the first game I was actually at was in Gothenburg when City played Arsenal on the weekend before the season started, and I was very, very concerned at that stage that the ideas were either A, not being transmitted, or B, were being transmitted, but the players at his disposal weren't capable of actually carrying them out. It was pretty chaotic in that game at the Alevi Stadium. There was, the centre-backs were splitting very wide at goal kicks and offering themselves for a pass, which is something that he likes, but when they were getting the ball, they were giving it away in very, very dangerous areas. the fullbacks pushing into midfield, they looked a little bit lost. A week later against Sunderland, okay, it wasn't perfect, but there's been a vast improvement. Since gone to Stoke, won 4-1, where if you compare that to the Stoke fixture of last season, the difference was just incredible. I mean, for a start, the players ran 10 kilometres further than they did in that fixture the previous season, which is not insignificant, but also just the kind of confidence in the way that they played. And then the West Ham game, the last game, the first half of that was genuinely outstanding football, and it was to the point where you're thinking, my word, he's really having an effect here in a short space of time. And obviously there's a long way to go, and he's not even got his own players out on the pitch, a lot of them. Only Nolito and Stones have really played. You got Gundogan, Sane, Claudio Bravo to come into the side immediately, then also Gabriel Jesus, who will be coming in January, who obviously everybody's really excited to see as well. So he's actually using Pellegrini's players for the most part. And there has been a significant improvement already. Still a long way to go, and I think he would admit that. But there's been very clear signs of improvement, in my opinion.
What have you made of the Joe Hart and Yaya Toure stuff? We've had Schweinsteiger, which is obviously very different, given he's hardly like an integral figure in the recent history of the club or anything. But there was a lot of very negative coverage of Mourinho's treatment of Schweinsteiger. What did you make of Pep's decision around Hart? I mean, I guess Toure is a bit more of an obvious one, but do you think he did the right thing with Joe Hart? Do you think that's a good move, an upgrade?
I mean, I just think, just on Schweinsteiger quickly, I think making him train with the under-23s is the problem that people have with that one, which obviously Guardiola hasn't gone to those lengths, and I think I'm quite glad he hasn't. But I mean, just on Joe Hart, I think, look, if Guardiola, I admire Guardiola and how single-minded he is in terms of the way he wants to play. Now, if he says, look, for me to play the style of football I admire and I advocate, and I've been sort of learning since the age of 13, 14, and I need a different goalkeeper to Joe Hart, fine, nobody has a problem with that. City waited 3 years to get this guy. He's won 21 major trophies or whatever in 7 seasons as a manager. You have to trust him, and you have to, give him the opportunity to do exactly what he wants. I think where I had a bit of a problem was him saying, Caballero playing 4 of the first 5 games of the season, when, no right-minded, right-thinking person would say that Caballero is a better option than Joe Hart. He might be slightly better with his feet, but not by a huge distance, and he's certainly not a better goalkeeper. So I think that was harsh. It may have been perhaps a message to the board, because there were whispers after John Stones was signed that the checkbook was closed, and I think it was a case of, look, we do need this type of goalkeeper, otherwise, we're not going to be able to play the way I want to play. But at the same time, it felt harsh. Yaya is different. I think the intensity off the ball that Guardiola demands, I don't think Toure is capable of anymore.
I'm laughing because I just flashed back to the semi-final of the Champions League last season.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's that sort of, slowed down sort of clip or whatever that go from that game, what people have sort of put together a highlights reel of him sort of jogging around, which I'm always sceptical of highlights type things like that. But there probably was a point to be made in the sense that he's not got it in him these days to play. I mean, he used to do the job of 2 men, and now he doesn't do that. But at the same time, the interesting thing around Toure is how sharply he divides the City fan base, because I have never known anything like it.
Right.
A player to divide people so sharply. On the one hand, you've got people who just think he's lazy, overrated, and can't stand him, mainly because of his agent, which is something that I don't let dilute my admiration for the player. And then on the other hand, you've got people who just think he's the king and should be given the sort of freedom of Manchester. I'm very much in the latter camp, whereby I can't think of a more important player in City's history. Certainly not since I've been going, and I would argue that probably before that, signed for £24 million. David Silva would be the best player I think I've ever seen play for City, but he cannot compete with Yaya Toure in terms of the big moments. Whenever City have needed someone Toure has been there, and obviously this isn't the ideal podcast to bring it up on, but the winning goal in the semi-final of the 2011 FA Cup was the moment for most City fans. All the naysayers who thought, even after Mansour's money came in, thought it was going to end badly and there was going to be some kind of, they were never going to win anything or whatever. Even those people started to believe that day that something could happen. And then he then scored the winner in the final. He scored 2 goals the season after the penultimate game against Newcastle to put City on the brink of the first title in 44 years. He scored a goal in the League Cup final, Pellegrini's first season. Scored 24 goals in all competitions from centre midfield that season when City won the League and Cup, a League and Cup double for the first time in the club's history. So really, no one can compete with the guy. And I mean, yes, he is a faded force and probably should have left at an earlier juncture. But at the same time, he deserves sort of like the biggest respect imaginable, really, because he's delivered on his brief like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, and that's quite enough lauding of Manchester City players. we've got to move on. I'll be in such big trouble if we don't. I've actually this is something I've thought about quite a lot, because I'm really enjoying the Mourinho honeymoon at the moment. It's been after the kind of dour misery of David Moyes and the kind of increasing defeatism of Van Gaal and the terrible dull football. It feels like a tonic and a massive breath of fresh air. But I keep remembering, this isn't going to last, because that Mourinho, in the entirety of history, would tell us that Mourinho is not going to be able to do this for a long time. And the thing you mentioned a couple of answers ago, you mentioned that City have been planning for Pep for 3 years, and I think arguably it's even longer than that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always seemed a bit strange to me that so much time has been put into planning for Pep when Pep's only going to be there for 3 years, because he's never done longer than that either, has he? It doesn't seem like he's going to be at the club for the rest of his career and all that kind of thing. Do you think that's a slightly odd decision?
No, because they wanted. I mean, when I say planning, I mean it just involved sort of convincing him to come. Really, everything else that the club have done, yes, it's sort of geared in that Barcelona way. And was ideal for Pep to come into, but that was exclusive of Pep in a way. But they have spent 3-4 years sort of in his ear and trying to make sure that the next available opportunity. I mean, they wanted him before he went to Bayern Munich, but he was totally adamant that was the next club for him, and there was nothing City could do about it. It was probably a good decision from his perspective, because I think City are a far slicker and better organisation in terms of absolutely every aspect of the club now than they were then. So yeah, they've spent a long time trying to get him in. I agree with you, he probably won't last longer than 3, maybe 4 years. There's an element of the transfers he's done this summer. A lot of them have been these development players who City are buying with one eye on the future. You look at Zinchenko, Moreno, who have both gone out on loan, and to a certain extent Gabriel Jesus, who'll be coming in December, ready to play in January. These are players with one eye on the future, and he's been very, very key in making sure that they come. I mean, he called Jesus personally to make sure that he turned down other clubs, which was quite a significant intervention, apparently. So that would suggest maybe he's got an eye on being there longer than 3 years. I mean, he did 4 years at Barcelona, 3 years at Bayern Munich, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, the chances of him doing longer than 3 or 4 years at City are obviously very remote, but I know for a fact that the club would probably want that if things are still going well. I mean, it was really interesting. If you go back to the summer Pep joined Bayern Munich and City got Pellegrini, Ferran Soriano, the chief exec at City, did, I think, his only sit-down interview with national newspapers in Britain. And he said at the time, the days of a Ferguson are gone. You're not going to get somebody doing, was it 26 years at United, Ferguson did? You're not going to get that again. And he talked about cycles. He said they're 3, 4, 5 year cycles of a manager now. No, and it's not a kind of indictment of the manager or the club. At the end of those 3, 4 years, when it all comes to an end, it's just a natural cycle. players get bored of the same voice. They want new ideas. The club needs fresh impetus. The manager needs a change. It's just a thing that it can't go on and on and on and on. It can't keep reinventing itself. And I think the club would say the same about Guardiola. They want him to come in, do 3-4 years, maybe a little longer if they could coax him into it. But they're very much aware that he's then going to move on and they've got to find somebody else. And what they're trying to do is trying to find someone else from within their own system, in the same way that Guardiola found his way into the hot seat at Barcelona. And they're sort of doing everything they can to school people, if you like, in the City way. And they have a very clear sort of identity now and a style of football that they're trying to sort of encourage across every single level of the academy and what have you. And they want somebody who's embedded in that culture and understands the club to take over at some stage in the future, with Patrick Vieira being the obvious example. It's
really interesting because from the United perspective, it feels like this is an area where City are just ahead of United at the moment in terms of organisational culture. And maybe it's less of a problem for City that Guardiola's going to do 3 or 4 years than it is at United that Mourinho's going to do 3 or 4 years, because you kind of praised Woodward for his transfer window activity, and I think that's entirely fair and justified. But there's next to no way the transfer window would have gone anywhere near that well without Mourinho being in situ, because a huge part of the attraction was to come to play for Mourinho's United. Which obviously, it's a big attraction to come and play for Pep City, and if it's Patrick Vieira's City, might be a less attractive prospect. But there is that kind of long-term planning that it's hard to see where that's happening at United. There's been a lot of changes and stuff to the academy, so maybe that's coming. Maybe they're looking across at City, and for the first time in a long time, thinking there's actually something they could learn from that approach. All right, let's talk about the derby specifically. I put a call out for questions on Twitter, and unfortunately they're mostly just friends of ours making in-jokes, so we'll skip those. But at C Armband, Chris says, what is City's plan without Aguero? Which I think we talked about that on the main show this week a bit. Options with Iheanacho and Nolito, but what do you think he's going to do, and how big a loss is it?
I mean, it's a huge loss, don't get me wrong. I mean, he scored 8 in 9 derbies or something, which is I think only Rooney has a better record in the Premier League era. He does seem to like facing United, and obviously he is City's best striker. There's just, again, no one in the world would argue with that, I don't think. For me, the option would be to bring Iheanacho in a almost like-for-like swap. I'm not saying they're the same player, but Iheanacho is someone who can go and play that role up front. I think he deserves it. I think he's fantastic every time he comes on. He's unbelievably professional, unbelievably likeable. I think his cameos again this season so far have just been outstanding. So how do you reward that? Well, when the main guy's out, Iheanacho should step in and fill the void, really. So if I was in charge, or if I were Guardiola, I would bring Iheanacho in a like-for-like situation. I suppose the other options are Sterling can play the sort of false 9 role, Nolito could do the same, which would then, maybe Leroy Sané could come in on the right and a little reshuffle behind. But for me, it would just make more sense to keep things sort of pretty much as they were, and bring in Kelechi Iheanacho, because I think he deserves it. I think he very rarely is fazed by an occasion, which has been the most startling thing about him, really. I mean, his technical quality and his professionalism and his hard work and everything else is really impressive, but that sort of ability to take on any challenge and still perform at such a young age has been what's taken me by surprise the most. So for me, it would be Iheanacho to start.
Yes, really interesting parallel, because I would move heaven and earth to get Marcus Rashford into the team, and would say a lot of really similar things about him. And the two players get compared all the time, and the analytics community have got to be in their bonnet about Iheanacho's underlying numbers being better than Rashford's. And this isn't a dig at that player at all, because he seems like he's going to have an incredible future. I just don't understand how anyone watches Marcus Rashford and doesn't go, yeah, this kid is the absolute real deal.
He's fantastic, yeah. He is. He's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I saw him a week before he sort of burst onto the scene. United and City played each other in I think it was under 21 level game, and he was played out of position, and he didn't have his best game, according to my colleague Rob Dawson, who had seen him more times than me, but it was instantly obvious. I remember writing down on the team sheet, something about it. I had to sort of do the live blog that day and needed things to say. And he was somebody who stood out as, his feet, he's just such quick feet, and he was clearly better than a lot of the other lads on the pitch. Now, I'm not saying I foresaw what was to come a week later when he'd scored goals for the first team, but it was immediately obvious having seen him. And I also think as well that he's another one like Iheanacho who has just risen to every single challenge that he's been given. And I think on form he would deserve to start the game. The only thing, on form, Martial, I'm presuming, wouldn't necessarily be a definite starter.
He scored for France, which I think is a big deal in the international break. It's his first goal for France. And
well, I think he's fantastic. I think he is an absolutely amazing prospect, and he would be in my strongest United 11. But perhaps on foot. He has been slightly anonymous, hasn't he, at the start of the season for United, so maybe there would be some change there. But I'm a big fan of his as well. I think both Rashford and Martial have got great futures ahead of them, and United are very fortunate to have them.
All right, you see, this is the kind of stuff that gets you accused of having Manchester United bias on the Evening News comment section. Being remotely fair-minded is apparently not a good thing.
No, you're not allowed that. You're not allowed that.
All right, last question then. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. My last question is, who, as a City fan, who worries you most about facing United?
Paul Pogba, without a shadow of a doubt. I think he has the potential to be the best player in the league, and I think when you've got the best player in the league, it's always quite a big help. I think over the last few years, City have had the best players in the league and perhaps haven't won as much as they should have because of that. But yeah, I don't know. I think he is potentially formidable, isn't he? I've seen his games for United. I've seen him plenty of times before, and I've always been remarkably impressed, even in games where he's not dominated. Most of the time that is his game, isn't it? He will dominate the game, and he has an influence in his own half and in the opposition half, and he does so much, and he can run a game. But even in games where he's less influential and less obviously dominating, he will produce a couple of moments of just absolute brilliance. He did it to City last season in the when Juventus beat City at the Etihad in the first group game of the Champions League. Just pulled this remarkable bending ball to the back post out of nowhere. If I remember rightly, it was with the outside of his boot or something, and set up a goal out of nothing. And that is what he is capable of. I just think he's a remarkable player, and the kind of hysterics from some people, United fans and opposition fans, about the fee paid is just so silly. When you consider how rich football clubs are in general, and particularly Manchester United, and B, the fact that for that money United are getting possibly the next great player of the game. If he is to kick on now and do what we think he can achieve whilst at United, he could go down as the next sort of absolute era-defining player. When you take all that into consideration, the money is so irrelevant. It really doesn't matter. I would say Paul Pogba. Obviously Ibrahimovic is another one, because he's a remarkable person in the sense that he's 34 and look how fit and healthy he is. We were talking before about Yaya can't do the job that he used to do anymore at 33. And I know it's a very different position, but Ibrahimovic is a super professional and has clearly taken care of himself incredibly well when you look at him and you see what he's still capable of at his age. But yeah, if I had to sort of identify my one big fear, I suppose it would be Paul Pogba.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time, Rob. This extra bonus podcast was made possible by the good people who have backed the show at patreon.com/rantcast, because that gives us the time to do a bit of extra stuff that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So head over there if you want a little bit more United Rant content in general. And Rob, that's my plug. Hit the people up with your plugs.
Yeah, well, just, go onto the Manchester Evening News website if you want to see anything about City, which I'm sure your listeners don't, that I've written. But if you're on Twitter, you can follow me at Rob Pollard _. And that would be it, really, Paul. Thanks for having me on, mate. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and thanks for talking to us. We'll do it again sometime.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.